Hi, everyone. This is a special Yahoo News live stream. And then there were two women, that is, running for president in 2016. Well, you certainly know who one of them is, and you're about to meet the other. Just this morning, she announced she's going to take on the boys' club of seemingly dozens of Republican men who are chasing their party's nomination on the road to the White House. She is the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard and the author of a new book called Rising to the Challenge, My Leadership Journey. Carly Fiorina, welcome. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Katie.
You know, I know that Mike Huckabee has said that running for president is, quote, like sticking your face in the blade of a fan, which sounds very uncomfortable. So why in the world do you want to do this?
Well, first of all, I must say I don't find it that way. You know, obviously I declared my candidacy formally this morning, but I've been out talking to voters for months now, and I find people energizing and uplifting, and the gulf between how people feel about their lives and what they think is going on in Washington, that gulf is huge. The disconnect between regular people and the political class is wide and growing. And I'm running because I think our nation is at a pivotal point. I think we need someone in the Oval Office who actually understands how the economy works, how the world works, who's in it, how bureaucracies work, how technology works, what executive decision-making is, and most importantly of all, perhaps, what leadership is.
I know that you lost to Barbara Boxer in 2010
Yes.
when you ran for the Senate in California, and you lost to her in a landslide. What did you learn from that experience about sort of presenting yourself to the public at large?
Well, of course, California is a very deep blue state. I started that race a year before the general election. We had a three-way primary on the Republican side. Nobody gave me a chance. I started bald because I had just finished cancer treatments. I won that three-way primary with 57% of the vote. And then while I lost the general election, as you point out, I won more Republican votes, more Democratic votes, and more independent votes than virtually anyone running anywhere in the nation in 2010. That's how big California is. What I learned is that a Republican can reach Democrats and independents. What I learned is that people actually don't necessarily want to hear more sound bites and more vitriol from politicians. And what I learned is the ground game matters. And in California, Democrats have a lot more votes than Republicans.
And let me ask you about working with John McCain in 2008 and Mitt Romney. I guess you were a surrogate to John McCain and then an advisor to Mitt Romney in 2012. What did those experiences teach you?
Well, first I got to see presidential politics up close, and so that was
and you're
really
still running.
Interesting. Really didn't scare me off, really interesting and helpful. And I think, you know, politics is personal. People make very personal decisions, and I think they're judging the character and the authenticity of someone. They're judging whether somebody cares about what's going on in their lives. Politics is personal.
You also are not the first candidate with a strong business background. Of course, there was Ross Perot, Steve Forbes, even Herman Cain.
Mitt Romney, of course.
Yes, that's true. But they all tried and failed. How are you going to avoid a similar fate?
Well, we're very different people. You know, we've had lots of politicians who failed too, but we don't say, therefore, politicians can't run. The thing that I would say is ours was intended to be a citizen government. It's what by, for, and of the people means. And that's not just words, but somehow in the last 50 years, we've gotten used to a professional political class. Why? I think what people actually expect of a leader is someone who knows that leadership, its highest calling, is to unlock potential in others and change the order of things for the better, not just manage the status quo as it's always been. I think people really understand that our economy is in trouble, and therefore it would be helpful to understand how the economy works. I think people understand the world's a more tragic and dangerous place now. The truth is, I know more world leaders on the stage today than virtually anyone else running, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton. So I understand the world and who's in it and how the world works.
And what about the economy? Would you say it's on the right path?
Well, I think it's been a very lackluster recovery, honestly, because if you look at the data, what you'll see is just in the last 6 or 7 years, we've had millions of people fall into poverty. We have record numbers of people on food stamps or some other kind of dependency program. We've tangled people's lives up in webs of dependency. For the first time in U.S. history, we're destroying more businesses than we're creating. We have the lowest labor participation rate since 1976. And a lot of people who are working wish they had better jobs, higher paying jobs. Income inequality is growing. I mean, all those things are not good news for the economy. They're actually structural problems in the economy.
Let's talk about the Republican field. Of the men who are currently running, who do you have the most in common with, or with whom do you have the most in common?
Well, honestly, I think everything's about me is different. Honestly, I have a completely different experience set than anyone running. I have a different perspective. Therefore, I bring a different set of skills to problem solving. And of course, I look different. So I think I'm a different candidate than is out there right now.
You have an incredibly strong business and tech background. Clearly, that's increasingly important in any campaign, your digital presence. And a lot of people were surprised that your team did not register carlyfiorina.org, but someone else did. And this is what they did with it. And they said, Carly Fiorina failed to register this domain, so I'm using it to tell you how many people she laid off at Hewlett-Packard. It was this many. That's 30,000 people she laid off. They used frowny faces. People with families, and what does she say she would have done differently? Quote, I would have done them all faster. What's your reaction, and what would you say to the person who did set that website up?
Well, look, I'm going to run on my record at Hewlett-Packard. Obviously, would I have preferred that we bought up every conceivable domain name?
Did you talk to someone on your team and say, what the heck happened here?
But, you know, here's what I and the people of Hewlett-Packard, and it really was a team effort, here's what we did in 6 years in the middle of the biggest technology recession in 25 years. We doubled the company to almost $90 billion. We took the growth rate from 2% to 9%. We tripled the rate of innovation to 11 patents a day. We quadrupled the cash flow. We went from lagging behind in every product category to leading in every product category. And so, yes, we created jobs. When you manage through a technology recession, every technology company, everyone, laid people off. It's a terrible decision to have to make. But sometimes there are tough decisions that must be made to strengthen a company for the long haul, which we clearly made. Every technology company's stock was down. You remember we just celebrated literally 15 years after the fact, the NASDAQ finally recovered to its dot-com highs. So it was a tough time I managed through, but we transformed a company from failing to succeeding.
But did you make that comment, I would have done them all faster? And do you think that sounded insensitive?
I don't know what that comment was referencing. It's clearly something taken out of context. Here's what I have said on other occasions. What I've said on other occasions is when you have someone who reports directly to you who is not performing the job, it's a very difficult decision to say to someone who reports directly to you that you know, gee, you're not doing the job anymore. In the occasions in my career when I've had to do that, because in business you're held accountable, unlike in politics where no one is ever held accountable. In business, when you're held accountable, usually what I found is once I made the decision that an executive had to go, a lot of people came up to me and said, I wish you'd done that sooner.
During your tenure at HP, the stock fell by more than 50%, which is a bigger drop than companies like IBM and Dell. And you were fired after 5.5 years as CEO. So since you're asking Americans to elect you as president, how would you explain that to them?
So first, you pick the two stocks during that dot-com bust whose stock held up very well. But if you looked at Cisco or a whole set of other stocks, as I said, the NASDAQ just recovered after 15 years to its dot-com high. So our stock did about what everybody's stock did. I've been very transparent, as you know, Katie, for years now. I was fired in a boardroom brawl over a 2-week period at Hewlett-Packard because we had board members who were leaking confidential information. And I think what that says is I know that when you're leading, which means you're challenging the status quo, that you're going to make some enemies along the way. I made some enemies in the boardroom. I'm not embarrassed by it. Not in the slightest. I'll stand on my record at Hewlett-Packard. I'm very proud of the work we did together at Hewlett-Packard. And I think what people need to know about me is I understand what making a tough call in a tough time with high stakes is all about. That's called executive decision making. And I think that's what's needed in the Oval Office. You don't learn that in a book. You learn it by doing it.
16 years after you became CEO of HP, still less than 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are female. Why are the numbers still so low?
It's amazing, isn't it? You think on the one hand we have technology companies led by women. I mean, Hewlett-Packard is still led by a woman, Meg Whitman. IBM is led by a woman. Yahoo's led by a woman. So on the one hand we have all these wonderful invisible signs of success, and yet on the other hand they're fewer than we might think. And I think part of it is that people's mindset needs to change. Diversity isn't about a nice to do. It's not because it's the right thing to do. Of course it is those things. It's if you have everyone sitting around the table and they all look alike and they all think alike and they all sound alike, it may be as easier to get to a decision, but it's not as good a decision because you're missing something. People need to understand that in the boardroom as well, and I agree, it's been much too slow.
With the exception of some companies, certainly like Yahoo, tech companies don't have a great track record in terms of female leadership, managers, executives. What did you think of Ellen Powell's lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins?
Well, you know, the jury spoke loud and clear in that, but I do know that when I was at Hewlett-Packard, we took a look at our statistics and we discovered, gee, we don't look as diverse as we should. And so I started a new process where I and my senior team would spend a quality time every quarter looking at all of the open positions above a certain level in the company. And I insisted that there be a diversified and qualified set of candidates for every job. And then we selected that. At the end of my tenure, half of my direct reports were women. I was very proud of that. They rose on merit. It's also true that within a year of my departure, 60% of them were gone. Because if the environment isn't created where merit really counts, not seniority, not who you know, not are you the same as someone else, true merit. If you don't have a true meritocracy, you will not get diversity.
I'm sure, you know, you did follow Ellen Powell's lawsuit, though. I'm assuming you read a lot about it. I'm sure you were very interested.
I was kind of busy. I was moving along trying to decide whether to run for president.
But do you think she had some legitimate claims, you know, because many people thought that some of the points she made were valid, even if the jury didn't specifically rule in her favor?
Well, look, I think if you look at the statistics in Silicon Valley, it's clear that it is not as diverse an environment as it could be or should be, which says to me that that industry, like so many others, like Wall Street, like the federal government, there's so many industries that are still not a real meritocracy. And that's what I think we have to strive for. By the way, I think the government should get off seniority systems and go to meritocracies as well. Pay for performance. I think union seniority systems disadvantage women disproportionately because women frequently come later to the workforce or they leave the workforce for a time. Anytime you don't have a system that focuses solely on merit and contribution, you're going to disadvantage women. It's just a fact.
Speaking of women, you've had some unkind words for Hillary Clinton. You said that she was not trustworthy and she hasn't accomplished very much. I think people might think, well, she was the senator from New York and she was Secretary of State. How can you really make those claims?
Well, you see, Katie, in the world that I come from, a title is just a title. I mean, you went through a whole bunch of things about me as CEO. You weren't impressed with my title. Why are we so impressed with political titles? Senator is a title. Secretary of State is a title. It's a completely legitimate question to say, what has anyone accomplished with their title? And the truth is, there are many in the political class who haven't accomplished a whole lot, despite their titles.
What about the trustworthy claim?
Well, you know, I think when you know that Benghazi is a purposeful terrorist attack, and you peddle a fiction for 4 weeks after that attack, that indicates you're not trustworthy. When you talk about a private email server in your basement, that's not trustworthy. When it turns out that you were supposed to be disclosing all these foreign government donations to the Clinton Global Initiative while you were Secretary of State and you didn't, and now the Clinton Global Initiative is having to restate their 990s, that doesn't sound very trustworthy to me.
You said some pretty flattering things about Hillary Clinton. I think it was back in 2008. So has your opinion of her changed in the last 7 years?
No, not at all. Hillary Clinton is a highly intelligent, very hardworking woman who has dedicated her life to public service. Those things are all still true. And yet, she does not have a track record of trustworthiness. And despite her impressive titles, she hasn't accomplished very much.
Let me ask you about the GOP and the trouble it's had among female voters. As you well know, in the last midterms, women were 10 points less likely than men to support Republicans. It was the largest gender gap in decades. How do you shore that up for the GOP?
Well, you know, I think the Democrats, when they talk about the war on women, we have to, I have been, putting some facts out there. So a lot of times women will come up to me and say, you know, I'm very uncomfortable with the extreme position that the Republican Party takes on abortion. And so I'll say, look, do you know what the Democratic position is? Most people don't, by the way. The Democratic policy is any abortion, any time, for any reason, at any point in a woman's pregnancy, right up until the last minute, to be paid for by taxpayers. Barbara Boxer described this policy as, it's not a life until it leaves the hospital. How do you feel about that? Most women are horrified. If I ask women, how do you feel about the fact that a 13-year-old girl needs her mother's permission to go to a tanning salon, but not to get an abortion? Most women are horrified by that. How do you feel about the fact that a tattoo parlor is more rigorously regulated and inspected than an abortion clinic? Women are horrified by that. The truth is, most Americans, most women, most young people, most Americans have now come to the point of view that abortion for any reason at all after 5 months is a problem. So let's take that common ground. I think our tone matters. We can't be judgmental. We can't be angry. But I also think we have to make sure people understand the extremity on the other side.
But you say after 5 months, and you oppose abortion except in the cases of rape, incest, or if the mother's life is in danger.
I'm pro-life,
so you
and
said,
I think,
right.
I
but I think what you're
yes.
But what you're saying is most Americans
that's right. So let's
support
find
it.
Common ground.
Right. So what is the common ground?
Well, the common ground clearly now, if you look at the polls, the common ground is people believe abortion after 5 months for any reason at all is wrong. So good. Let's take that common ground.
Yes. So where's the
common ground?
So you oppose it except in the case of rape, incest, or if the mother's life in danger. So what about those who feel it should be legal for the first 5 months?
You see, Katie, I think you're just jumping over what I just said. So what the political class on both sides has done for way too long is argue at the extremes. And in the meantime, there is real common ground. So we can argue at the extremes here, or we can say,
I'm
you know
curious,
what?
What is the common ground?
The common ground is, if you look at every poll, the majority of Americans, the majority of women, and the majority of young people now believe that abortion after 5 months, for any reason at all, is wrong. So let's pass. There was a bill that up in front of the House. Let's pass the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
So that's
common ground.
What is your position, though, on abortion? You're as a candidate.
I'm a pro-life candidate because I believe that science is proving us right every day. We've been doing successful surgery in utero on fetuses as young as 4 months for quite a long time. The DNA in a zygote is precisely the same as a DNA the day you die. But I understand and respect, Katie, not everyone agrees with me. What I think is, even where we don't agree on everything, let's come together and solve a problem where we have common ground. And the truth is, there are lots of children being aborted after 5 months that Americans now agree maybe we should step in and save them. So let's do that.
So do you believe that Roe v. Wade should be overturned?
You know, Roe v. Wade right now is the law of the land. Can we take on common ground right now? Let's just get that done.
So is the answer to that question no?
Let's get common ground done first.
Okay. Let's talk about gay marriage. What do you hope the Supreme Court will decide?
Well, what I hope has nothing to do with what the Supreme Court will decide. What I've been very public in saying is that I think government should not bestow benefits unequally. So I've always been a supporter of civil unions. I provided benefits to same-sex couples when I was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. And I also believe, as so many do, that marriage has a spiritual foundation, because only a man and a woman can create life. I hope we will have come to the point in our country where we can accept those two views and tolerate each other, that government shouldn't bestow benefits in a discriminatory fashion, and that people who believe marriage has a religious foundation, those beliefs should be respected. I hope we can come to that point.
But as you well know, the gay people feel like they have a right to actually be joined in marriage, just like heterosexual couples.
And they are being in civil unions, and they are being in civil unions. That's what's been going on, and government bestows in those states where civil marriage is legal, benefits are being bestowed to those gay couples, and I support that. And the Supreme Court is now going to decide if that becomes the law of the land.
So you support civil unions but not gay marriage?
I believe we need to respect those who believe that the word marriage has a spiritual foundation. I think there are people who believe that. I'm one of them. Why can't we respect and tolerate that while at the same time saying government cannot bestow benefits unequally?
But I guess that because many gay couples think that is tantamount to discrimination.
Well, but it isn't. It isn't. It clearly isn't.
Let me ask you about the Indiana and the Religious Freedom Act. How did you feel about that act, and how do you today and when it came out?
Well, I was very public about this. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people with deeply held religious convictions who have good reason to believe the government is going to take action against them. That is happening on the national level, and it is happening at the state level. I was really disappointed to see CEOs weigh into this. I frankly think it's the height of hypocrisy for Tim Cook, who's a wonderful CEO, but I think it's the height of hypocrisy, really, for him to talk about boycotting Indiana, and yet he has no trouble doing business in Saudi Arabia or China or any of these other highly repressive countries where gays and women are treated terribly.
At the same time, Eli Lilly, Gap, Marriott, Apple, even Angie's List all spoke out publicly against this Indiana law.
And I think
you don't think they should have done that?
I think they spoke out because they were being pressured by special interest groups, and I think that's a shame. I really do.
Are you out of touch? Because I know that on both gay marriage and Indiana law, and the Indiana law, because 58% in the latest poll support legalization of gay marriage. 54% say businesses in Indiana should not be able to discriminate against gays and lesbians. And I'm wondering, it seems that the tide is turning in the other direction.
Well, of course, you're accepting the premise of the opponents of the Indiana law that this permits businesses to discriminate. I don't think that's the case. But I also think, Katie, look, as I've said a couple times now, I think that not everyone is going to agree 100% of the time on 100% of the issues. What I think people expect of anyone running for president is honesty and authenticity about what I believe. And I think they expect as well respect for people who disagree with me. It's one of the reasons why, when running in California as a conservative, I nevertheless won so many Democratic and independent votes. They didn't agree with me on everything, but they agreed with me on enough things. They understood how I would approach a problem. And I think that's what it's all about. There is not a single candidate out there for anyone who's a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or a conservative. There's no candidate with whom they're going to agree 100% of the time. I don't agree with my husband Frank 100% of the time. The question is, can we find enough common ground? And does someone understand how someone will lead and what someone believes?
Let me ask you about gun legislation. How do you feel about stricter gun legislation? I know that you get very high marks from the NRA, and I'm wondering where you stand on some of those issues.
Well, you know, we don't enforce the gun laws we have. We don't enforce the gun laws we have. And that's why we have, you know, record numbers of murders in places like Chicago, which have the strictest gun laws in the country, among the strictest gun laws in the country. So I think there are so many people who use this as well as a wedge issue instead of looking at the facts. So let's look at the facts that the gun laws we have aren't enforced. Let's look at the fact that in every one of these terrible shootings, you had a situation with someone who was clearly very, very mentally ill, people trying to bring attention to this person as being a danger to themselves, and they couldn't bring attention to it. And let's also state the fact that much of the proposed gun legislation that was pushed through Congress after those shootings, it wouldn't have made any difference at all in those particular cases.
Having said that, would you support closing the loophole on universal background checks at gun shows and on the internet?
You know, I don't support broadening anti-gun legislation in any way until we're prepared to enforce the laws we have on the books, and we're not.
Let me ask you about the Affordable Care Act. You've been critical of that. What would you offer as an alternative?
I think there are two very specific things that we need to do. First of all, let's understand why I say it has to go, because the law itself is longer than a Harry Potter novel. And it's accompanied by another 40-plus thousand pages of regulation. In other words, it's so complicated no one can understand it. Of course, it was written by the drug companies and the health insurance companies who wanted to make sure that they understood their playing field. It's called crony capitalism. All we did was take a health insurance market that was a regulated oligopoly, a cozy little relationship between regulators and health insurance companies, and we nationalized it. We didn't solve the problem. Just today, there's a big front page story about the fact that emergency room visits are up under Obamacare. So one, we ought to let states manage high-risk pools. There are people who truly need help, and they need help from the government. I think it works better at the state level, not the federal level, because the states are closer to the people they're trying to help. And secondly, let's try the one thing we've never tried. We've never tried actually a competitive health insurance marketplace. It's always been regulated. It's always been a cozy little relationship between the companies and the government. Let's try a free market where people actually have to compete for your business.
Let's move on to foreign policy. Isn't this great? We can cover all this ground.
Yes, we can cover all this ground.
These are very scary times.
Yes, they are.
In many parts of the world. You have absolutely no foreign policy experience.
Actually, that's not true.
It's not?
No, I know more world leaders on the stage today than anyone running, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton.
So you know world leaders.
I do, many.
But would you say you do? Well, then why don't you explain your foreign policy experience?
I've done business with these people. I haven't had photo ops. I've done business with them. I've also chaired the advisory board at the Central Intelligence Agency. I've advised 2 secretaries of defense, a secretary of state, a secretary of NSA, a secretary of Homeland Security. I've sat as close as you and I are now to Vladimir Putin, to Bibi Netanyahu, to the Chinese leadership, to the King of Jordan. All these people are people that I have literally had conversations with about substantive issues, business, charity, what they hope for their country. So I actually think I have quite a bit of experience.
So you'll run on that as your foreign policy experience and feel that you have interacted with foreign leaders.
Absolutely.
And that makes you well equipped to deal with world crises.
Absolutely.
Okay. You criticized President Obama in your book. You said, quote, "The president seems to think that if he condemns Russia for invading Ukraine or ISIS for beheading James Foley, he has acted. He hasn't. He's just talked." So I'm curious to know what you might have done differently than the president in both of these scenarios.
See, I think the president, unfortunately, always is presenting us with a false choice. And his false choice always is, if you don't agree with what I'm doing, then you must want to rush to war. It's just not true. So let's just take Ukraine. There are 4 things we should immediately be doing that would give Vladimir Putin, a formidable man, the clear signal that he faces strength and resolve on our part. 1, we should rebuild the 6th Fleet. 2, we should rebuild the missile defense program, which Obama inexplicably pulled out of. 3, we should conduct regular, aggressive military exercises in the Baltic states. And 4, we should arm the Ukrainians. Every single one of those things is totally within our control. With regard to ISIS as well, we've been asked to do very specific things by our allies, and we have not done them. We should arm the Kurds. We haven't. When King Abdullah of Jordan was here and flew back, when the Jordanian pilot was burned alive, he was here asking our government for bombs and materiel. We have not provided it. We should. The Egyptians are asking us to share intelligence. We're not. This is an opportunity. Actually, ISIS is a terrible evil. They have to be confronted and ultimately defeated. But we have a set of Arab allies who are asking us for very specific things to help them fight ISIS, because they know ISIS is their fight. And we haven't done any of the things I just mentioned.
There's some controversy about whether family members or companies should pay ransom for the release of their loved ones when they're abducted by terrorists. I'm curious about your position on this.
Well, I just can't imagine what a terrible feeling it would be to have a loved one in harm's way when you felt as though maybe money would make a difference. It also turns out that the FBI has been negotiating ransom payments, apparently, with the captured people that the drone strike just killed accidentally, unfortunately. So obviously our government has been engaging in ransom payments as well. And we know that President Obama decided to trade 5 prisoners for Bo Bergdahl. I mean, I think that was a terrible trade. So I can't imagine the agony of a family trying to do everything possible to free a loved one. And yet I think our government cannot negotiate with terrorists.
So you think the rules should not change at all?
I do not. I think the Obama administration appears to have violated their own rules from what I have been reading.
Let's talk about some other issues. Immigration. Do you believe in providing a path to citizenship?
I do not. Not for those who came here illegally and who have stayed here illegally. I think we have to secure the border, something that hasn't happened under either Republicans or Democrats. It's not rocket science to do it. We just haven't done it. Northern borders and southern borders. I think we need to fix the legal immigration system, which has been broken for decades under both Republicans and Democrats. You know, we talk about it. Somehow it just never gets done. We have 16 different visa programs. We don't have a verifiable employer system that could be used. Half the people who are here illegally came on a legal visa, and we just never bothered to follow up. But for those who came here illegally and stayed here illegally, I think they may earn legal status over time, but not citizenship. Because I know too many people, as do you, who worked to earn the right of citizenship, the privilege of citizenship. And I think we're fair-minded people.
But what about the Dreamers? I know you've talked about that group of people publicly.
Yes, well, in California, I supported the DREAM Act because I think that you cannot punish children who came here through no will of their own as young children. But I also think we have the cart backwards. When we pass something called the DREAM Act before we've even secured the border, all we're doing is making the problem worse. And we corrode people's faith in government because folks out there say, you know what, the federal government's first job, honestly, is to protect the nation and secure the border. Why don't you secure the border? We could, we should, we haven't.
Let's talk about marijuana. Do you think marijuana should be legalized?
I do not.
Why?
Because I'll tell you a story. When I underwent my cancer treatments, I remember my doctor early on, after my diagnosis, said to me, are you interested in medicinal marijuana? And I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, good. He said, we don't know what marijuana is anymore. It's a chemically complex compound. We don't know how it interacts with other drugs. We just don't understand this anymore. And I think what we're doing when we legalize marijuana, we're sending the signal to young people that marijuana is just like a beer. It's not. It's not. If we want to treat marijuana as a medicine, fine, then regulate it as a medicine. But to just say to kids, this is no big deal, is misleading them. It's dangerous. And, you know, when you see all these kids stoned like it's no big deal, I don't think that's helping them or our nation.
So you feel comfortable with medicinal marijuana? If
it's properly regulated like a medicine, which it's not, by the way. I mean, you know, you've been to LA, all you have to do is walk down Venice Beach. Anybody can get medicinal marijuana. It's not a medicine. It's not a medicine. It's a recreational drug right now.
What's your position on climate change?
Well, you know, I think we have to read all the fine print. So every one of the scientists that tell us that climate change is real and being caused by man-made activity also tell us that a single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. So when I see a state like California destroy lives and livelihoods with environmental regulation that will make no difference at all to climate change, when I see the Obama administration take that same regulation and apply it nationally, it will make no difference at all, and yet we're destroying people's lives and livelihoods. I wonder, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this when it won't have any impact? So I think the answer to this problem is innovation, not regulation. But I must say it angers me when liberals say, I'm prepared for you to lose your job in the name of sending a signal to whom? China could care less. In fact, China is delighted that we are not spending any time or energy figuring out clean coal because they're going to go do it.
So ideally, what should be done? What could be done to attack this issue?
Well, I think we have to focus on innovation. We have to focus on innovation. So we have to focus on how to make coal cleaner. Look, coal provides half the energy in this nation still, not to mention around the world. So to say we're going to basically outlaw coal, which is what this administration has done, is so self-defeating. It destroys jobs, it destroys communities, it's not helping us, and it's not helping global warming. So let's get on with the innovation about how to make sure that we actually have clean coal technology. The Chinese will do it if we don't, and they are doing it.
Other than clean coal technology, are there other innovative things that you are excited about that could help attack this problem?
Well, you know, there are lots of wonderful innovative things. The thing that I think we never do is tell people the whole truth. So just as an example, I mean, wind technology is very exciting to people. But do we tell people the truth that it slaughters millions of birds every year? I mean, eagles, falcons, birds that people care about. Do we tell people that it's slaughtering these birds? Does anyone see how, honestly, unsightly those huge wind turbines are on some of the most beautiful hills? In other words, there is no magic answer. There is no perfect source of energy. Every one of them has a downside. Solar is great, but solar takes huge amounts of water. There isn't water in a lot of the places where solar energy works well. We need to, the American people can handle trade-offs. They're pretty smart. Let's tell them the truth about what the trade-offs are, and let's tell them the truth as well about the fine print of the science.
And let me I guess, in closing, at least on climate change, would you say it's a serious issue facing the country and, in fact, the world?
I think it is, frankly, ridiculous for the Obama administration to call ISIS a strategic distraction and then go on to say that climate change is the single most pressing national security issue of our time. That's hyperbole.
Let me ask you how you feel about it. I'm not asking you what the Obama administration, how they have assessed it. I'm curious what you think about climate change.
I do not think climate change is a national security threat that equals in any way Iran getting a nuclear bomb, ISIS beheading people because of their religion.
Let me rephrase it, or actually just repeat it. Do you think climate change is a serious issue facing the country and the world?
I think it's an issue, and I think we ought to be focusing time, energy, and resources on innovations that will help address this issue. But I think we need to keep it in perspective. I think a far more serious issue is the number of Americans whose lives are tangled up in webs of dependence. I think a far more serious issue is people who aren't getting a good education. I think a far more serious issue are the dangers we face around the world. I think a far more serious issue right now is the fact that our government is a vast, bloated, unaccountable, corrupt bureaucracy. I think every one of those are more pressing and immediate issues.
Let me ask you about Baltimore and the events that have unfolded there. What do you think can be done to improve race relations in this country, specifically between police departments and minority communities?
Yeah. Well, of course, the sad truth is every single one of these circumstances is slightly different. In Baltimore, of course, you have an African-American police chief, an African-American mayor, you have an African-American prosecutor. First, I would say all policemen ought to be equipped with body cams, and every vehicle ought to have cameras inside it so that we can hold accountable, so that we know what actually happened. We're not guessing at what happened. Secondly, what's tragic to me about Baltimore, there's no excuse ever for the violence we saw, and unfortunately, the peoples whose lives and businesses were destroyed are other African Americans in Baltimore. But what we saw are people who have no stake in their communities. What we saw are the scourge of drug addiction and lack of criminal justice reform around that issue. So I think we need to get these communities on their feet again. I think we do need serious criminal justice reform around drug usage, and I think we need to have the technology to hold police departments truly accountable. So we're not guessing about what happened.
I was going to ask you about what should be done to help police departments deal with these situations, and how did you feel about what happened to Freddie Gray?
Well, it's terrible. I mean, you look at that picture, you look at that picture of his body being dragged into the van, and how can you not feel terrible about that? I mean, I don't know what circumstances led up to that, but we know something terrible happened in that van. But honestly, I would feel so much better if we had cameras and the police knew that they were being watched. I think transparency in any situation adds to accountability.
How else can police be held accountable for their actions other than, say, cameras and things along those lines?
I do think that we have to have a serious conversation in this country about criminal justice reform. I mean, there are a number of states in this nation that have really reformed how drug crimes are treated. And as a result of that, there are fewer arrests, there's fewer time in jail. As someone who lost a family member to drug addiction, I don't think we're helping anyone when we criminalize drug use. And so many of these arrests, this pattern of arrest and incarceration and rearrest in these inner cities, it goes on around drugs.
I know that in the book you talk about the vitriol and that people are kind of tired of that. And I'm just wondering if you regret that Demon Sheep ad that got so much attention that you did back in, I guess, 2010, where it got a lot of play. Do you wish that you hadn't done that ad, and are we going to be seeing more ads along those lines?
Well, I'm not sure I would call that ad vitriolic. Many people found it funny. Look, it was controversial. There were some people who loved it. There were some people who hated it. We had a very specific purpose with that ad way back then, which was to get attention on a very limited budget.
You definitely got the attention.
We're not running any ads for quite a long time on this campaign.
Cecily Strong at the White House Correspondents' Dinner said, Carly Fiorina is considering running for president. Seems like a lot of work just to be a Fox News pundit. By the way, she took shots at many, many people. But implicit in those comments, or in that comment, I think, Carly, is that many people believe you don't have a great chance of securing the GOP nomination. You're polling at around 1%. So are you hoping that you may be, in fact, tapped as a vice presidential candidate?
Oh, Katie, would you ask a male candidate that
question? Yes, I would ask. Well, I think a male candidate who is polling 1%, I would ask that question.
Well, look, I started out as a secretary in a 9-person real estate firm. I've been underestimated my whole life, and it doesn't trouble me that a bunch of polls or a bunch of pundits are underestimating me now. What voters tell me out there, the encouragement that I get, those are the people I'm listening to. And
so you're optimistic those numbers are going to go up?
Well, and I think people are looking for somebody who understands how the economy actually works instead of just talking about it, who understands how the world works and who's in it instead of just flying around it, who understands bureaucracies and how they work, because we have a giant bloated bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., who understands technology and who understands executive decision making, which is making a tough call at a tough time with high stakes for which you're prepared to be held accountable. I think that's what the job entails. So I'm running because I think I can win the job and I think I can do the job.
Well, I first interviewed you. You reminded me back in the late 90s.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's good to be able to have an extended conversation with you again. I want to mention the name of your book is called Rising to the Challenge, My Leadership Journey. People can buy it and read more about your various positions.
Well, this isn't a political book. Actually, it has very little to do with my positions. It's a very personal book, Katie.
Is it totally a coincidence, though, that it came out when you just announced that you're running for president?
It's a very personal book, Katie. I talk in very personal terms about our daughter's death, about my challenge with cancer, and as well about what I think the challenges of the nation are.
Well, good luck with your candidacy.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for coming in and for sitting down and talking with us here at Yahoo.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Carly. And this has been a special Yahoo News live stream. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon.